Now, let's take a look at some of the frequently seen mistakes made by students during writing the lab report. Okay, number one, you do not want to refer your study as this study or the study. Okay, and and you should refer it to as the current study, the present study, or the presently conducted study. And there's a reason for that. And the reason is it becomes very difficult to distinguish which study you are referring to when you are talking about quote unquote this study. Okay, so for instance, this is what the person wrote. Smith et al. 2019 has shown that it is difficult to keep track of two things simultaneously. This study aims to see if that is true or not by using another method to test the hypothesis that multitasking is difficult. Okay, so this study, in other words, let me just highlight this. This study, okay, are you talking about the Smith et al. Study? If it is, then this sentence, then this two sentences do not make sense at all because um, Smith et al. Was already conducted last year in 2019, right? Then how can this study aims to see if it is true by using another method to test that hypothesis? Because I mean, why are you testing the hypothesis that was done already? Okay, now if you are referring to your study that you are describing in the current paper, then then you know then this study, what you are writing is immediately subsequent to what you have just referred to, which is the Smith et al. Study, right? And then that becomes very confusing. Okay, so now if this study is what you really mean by the current study that you are conducting, that you're referring to as your study, then it makes sense. Okay, but then you can see how the usage of quote unquote this study really brings a lot of confusion to the reader. Okay, the reader is thinking, are you talking about your study or are you talking about the study that you mentioned in the previous sentence? Okay, so for clarity purpose, you do not want to refer your study as this study when you are writing the lab report. Okay, now second one is I get this question a lot, and that is which tense that you should write in. And in general, you should write in the past tense. Okay, now there are several exceptions. Now let me talk about why you should write in past tense first. And the reason why you should be writing in past tense is that everything that you have conducted before happened in the past. Okay, especially let's say in the method section. So everything that was already done, you're describing to what was already done in the past. So then obviously everything should be in past tense. Okay, now the results also, the results when you're writing, this is the results that you have calculated already. Okay, which means that this is something that is happening, that happened in the past. Now there are several exceptions. And so the exception number one is when you are stating something, the finding of the previous with the present study implied, which is usually internally true. Okay, so let's say if you found a study that suggests that men and women have equal tendency to help a female victim. Okay, so that means that the study's finding suggested, okay, because it's using suggested because because the findings is suggesting something in the past, okay, that was found in the past. Okay, now but you can see that this sentence, men and women have equal tendency to help a female victim, and that is because what is suggested is something that was true in the past and probably is going to be true nowadays and probably will be true in the future. Okay, so and that's why when you are writing something that is kind of what the results actually imply, which is usually eternally true, you should write that in the present tense. Okay, that's the first exception. And the second exception is that when you are describing the general methods and telling the readers about the goals of the current study in your introduction, okay? And the reason is for that when you are talking about in the introduction, you are kind of expecting something is going to happen, okay? And even though that it's kind of that you are because you are reading the person. I mean, you're reading the introduction, what the actual study is about. Okay, so for instance, you should write something like this in the introduction. The present study aims to follow the progression of the affirmation study by investigating the effects of gender on the tendency to engage in social harming behavior. Okay, like the reason against study, which only use one observer, the present study intends to use three or more observers. So the introduction section, when you are talking about the present study and what the present study is aiming to do, you usually write that in the present tense as well. Okay. Okay, there is another exception, and that is exception number 3, and that's when you are recommending future studies. Okay, and now obviously, when you are recommending something for the future studies to do that has not happened yet, so therefore you should write them in some sort of future tense or a present tense. Okay, so for instance, what it says, recommendation of future of future directions include improved control of extraneous factors such as blah 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 blah. Okay, so include, it's not included or it's not will include. Okay, because you can see when you read this sentence, the only tense that really makes sense is the present tense. Okay. Okay, now the third thing that I see a lot in scientific writing, and which is a big no-no, is that you do not want to post questions and then answer it yourself. Okay, instead you should write something that is in a that does not involve a question mark. Okay, so you don't want to write something that, but the question is, how applicable would the results be in New York City? You want to write something like, however, whatever results may be applied to New York City remains unanswered. Okay, so don't post question and attempt to answer it yourself. This is not Hamlet. This is not Shakespeare. Okay. Okay. Number 4, do not cite the same material more than once within the paragraph. Okay, so when you are citing multiple authors, you need to cite up to 5 authors between you et al. Or and colleagues. Okay, so when you are writing, so let's say if you have already referred to one study, okay, and then you just keep writing about this study, you don't have to keep citing it over and over and over and over again. Especially if it's within the same paragraph. Now, there is one exception, and that is, let's say if you have a long paragraph, you talk about study A in the first sentence, study B in the second sentence, and study A in the third sentence again. Okay, so in that third sentence, because there was a study B in between in that second sentence, and then in the third sentence, when you're referring back to study A, you have to cite that study again. Because if you don't, then the reader are going to assume that the citation source is from study B because you did not give it a new citation. Okay, so that is very important. Okay, now, but if you're just writing within the same paragraph and just describing one study within the same paragraph, you don't need to keep citing it over and over and over again. Okay, now, number 5, when you are talking about the previously conducted study, talk briefly about the method and most importantly, what the results implied. Okay, so this is really important. A lot of students, when they are writing the introduction section, now we're gonna talk about this when you are writing your second and your third lab. This doesn't apply for the first lab because you're not responsible for writing the intro or the discussion. Okay, now, but I see a lot from students is that they will find a study and then they will describe that previously done study in such a detail that it takes about 2 paragraphs just to describe it fully. Okay, and we don't need that. You don't need to talk about it. So when you are talking about a previously done study, you should talk about it in the context that applies to the current study. In other words, your study. Okay, so you should only talk about the specifics of the previously conducted study of these specifics, and how these specifics are relevant to the presently conducted study, and nothing else. You don't want to mention about how many subjects they have. You don't have to mention about where exactly they did the study unless it's relevant to your presently conducted study. Okay. Okay, number 6, do not use the, this, and that ambiguously. Okay, so if and I see this a lot. So for example, students will write this supported the hypothesis. Okay, so you're saying like what is this and what is the hypothesis? So you want to elaborate on that. So you want to see something like, so you want to say something like the result of the current study supported the hypothesis that manipulating task difficulty indeed influence the discrimination data, something like that. Okay, you want to say you want to elaborate what is this, and you want to elaborate what the hypothesis is. Okay, so don't just write stuff ambiguously. Okay, and because your professor, in other words, me, I'm not a mind reader. I don't know what you mean by this. I don't know what you mean by that. So when you say this, that, the, you really want to elaborate and flesh out everything in that has a content. Okay. Okay, next one. When there are 2 or more antecedents, do not use the ambiguous pronoun. Okay, so this is the example that I gave you. Okay, after the research administrators handed the instruction sheets to the participants, they would head to the cubicle and start running the experiment. Well, who is they? Okay, right? So who is they? Because you got the participants and you got the research administrator, and they can be referring to the participants, and they can be referring to the research administrators. Okay, and that is very ambiguous. So don't do this. So in this case, you want to say something like the participants would head to the cubicle and start running the experiment. Okay. Okay, next, pay attention to subject-verb agreement. So I mean, I'm not your grammar teacher from elementary schools. I know I do make them I do make grammatical errors sometimes as well. I mean, we all do, but then so definitely make sure that there are subject-verb agreement there. Okay. Okay, just make sure. And something that I see a lot is this. Okay, so the aims of the presently conducted study. Okay, so if you take out of the presently conducted study, it really is saying the aims should not be is, but then it should be the aims are. Okay, so just make sure that this, I see this kind of things a lot. Okay, and that gets to even the best of it. I see this even in the best writers. So make sure that before you submit this, check your grammar. Okay, now this is the next one I see a lot. Okay, affect with an A is a verb. Okay, affect with an E is a noun. Okay, so when you're writing this, you want to say, so whenever you want to say something is significantly affecting something, you should use affect with an A. Okay, and when you're saying the effect of something, then that should be the effect with an E. Okay, so just make sure that affect and effect is kind of is distinguished well. Okay. Okay, the next one is don't use the language of you this, you that. So don't write in the second person perspective. Okay, so don't write something like when your bell curves are flat, you have a platykurtic distribution. You want to write something like flat bell curves are strongly associated with platykurtic distribution. So you don't want to run yours, yeah, there where you have don't use that kind of language. Okay, that is something that nobody does in scientific communication style. Okay, number 11, don't add extra do or does in a sentence. Okay, so for instance, the findings do suggest that more than 50% of the pedestrian bystanders do try to help the strangers in need of aid. You don't need that do. Okay, so that just don't do that. Okay. Number 12, when discussing participants with subjects, stick to either the plural or singular within the same sentence. Now, between sentences, if you switch, that's fine, but don't write something like each participant was brought to a cubicle where they were tested, okay? Because again, this is the plural singular agreement with disagreement within the sentence, and they should always agree. Okay, so each participant is a singular. Okay, and so in this case, you should substitute this to he/she. Okay, or if you want to write this in the plural form, then you should write participants with an S. Participants were brought to the cubicle where they were tested. Okay, so either one was fine, but don't have this disagreement within the same sentence. Okay. Okay, next one. Okay, so don't start sentences with conjunctions or with such as and, but, yet, or. Okay, so that's something that just good writers don't do. Okay. 14, do not end a sentence with a preposition. Okay, so this is, I don't think a lot of people do this anymore, but I still just want to bring out this. Okay, you don't want to read something like the research assistants recorded where the participants were at. Oh, good grief, right? So that's just, yeah, don't end with at. Okay. Okay, number 15. Either means one of the two. Okay, neither means none of the two. So example, if you write, you can use either hand to catch the ball, that means you can use your left hand or you can use your right hand to catch the ball. Now, if you write, you can use neither the right hand nor the left hand to catch the ball, then that means you cannot use the left hand. Also, you cannot use your left hand to catch the ball. Okay. All right. So now one more thing is that I want to say either usually goes with or. Okay. Neither goes with nor. Okay. So don't write something like this. You can use neither the right hand or the left hand. Okay. That's wrong grammar. Okay. Neither always goes with nor. Okay, number 16, experiment versus study. Okay, so when you are not sure about nature of the conducted research, okay, especially true about the study that you are reading that you did not do, it's safer to refer it as a study rather than an experiment. Experiment, as later what you will learn in the class, it really means that this was a true experiment that involved manipulation and some sort of control experimental group. So in other words, some sort of manipulation was done. Okay, now study is much broader kind of research method. Okay, which really includes quasi-experiments, surveys, archival data, meta-analysis, all that stuff. So it's safer to refer to things as the current study or the previous studies. Okay, so it's easier to say also. It's also less words to type. Okay, number 17. Distinguish between that and which. Okay, so which really provides additional information that is usually not essential. That, okay, on the other hand, it really introduces sentences that provide essential information. So if you continue with that blah 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 blah, that usually means that this is a critical detail that should not be neglected. Okay, now but if you say something, comma, in which blah 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 blah, and that in which is the stuff that follows that in which usually means it's not essential. It's further elaboration for clarity purposes, not so much, it does not break the entire meaning of the sentence. Okay. Okay, so the last thing I want to say is just don't make this mistake. Okay, so now on lab reports, if you make one of these mistakes, you will lose one point for each occurrence. Okay.